joined today by
J.R. Romano.
Hey everyone, J.R. Romano, chairman of the Connecticut Republican Party. Today is going to be an interesting podcast. First and foremost, I have to laugh at this week. Ned Lamont decided to fire one of the board of trustees for UConn, and it was and this is what you gotta have to love Ned Lamont's just complete lack of integrity. Because, this is, at the end of the day, what Ned is refusing to admit, that he got rid of this guy because the guy was personal friends with Bob Stefanowski. He had helped Bob out. He'd raised money, had donated money. But in general, he wasn't a big Republican donor through the years. I mean, he had a personal relationship with Bob because of ties to GE. And Ned Lamont got rid of him. Now, for those that don't know, this guy, Denis Nayden, had raised or been one of the integral parts in raising over $300 million for the University of Connecticut. He had been originally appointed by a Republican governor, but had been kept on by Dan Malloy because of how important he was towards their efforts and the goals and his network and what he was doing for the university. But to Ned Lamont, no, Ned didn't even meet with the guy. He raised $300 million. Well, he was part of a team that raised over $300 million. Actually, their goal was $300 million. Denis Nayden was a part of the group that outraised the $300 million by $170 million, personally donating about $5 million. But Ned's fragile little ego couldn't handle the fact that this person who had an appointment would dare go against, his silver spoon upbringing. It's almost laughable. And I would almost have more respect for Governor Lamont if he stood up and said, look, elections have consequences. I would like to take the board in a different direction. And I think, obviously the way that I see the world and the way that Mr. Nayden sees the world is very different. So, at the end of the day, I would almost respect that more, but to kind of hide behind, oh, it had nothing to do with that. I had no idea. No one buys that. The media doesn't buy it. The other trustees don't buy it. And the fact this continues, and this is what everyone needs to understand why this story matters. Because he lied about the tolls. He's lying about this. He's lying about everything that's happening in government. And this is the best part. He shuns the guy that gave, had donated money to Bob Stefanowski, a political opponent, but wraps his arms around the guy that was one of the leading perpetrators of the financial collapse. Put him in the administration. This is Ned Lamont. It's insane. But this is the governor we have right now. It's crazy. And here's the other thing that he did. This is my favorite. So if you remember, and let's see, let's play the clip.
Will you increase taxes as governor?
It's on the table. That will be part of the solution. Everybody's going to have to contribute to getting us out of this mess. I'm asking everybody to do a little bit more.
That's right. Ned Lamont said that the unions were going to have to come to the table. Well, guess what we found out this week? No concessions. No concessions. No concessions. Literally, the unions are not giving up anything while the state of Connecticut is in fiscal freefall. He's not asking anything of that. He hasn't even proposed to the public what he asked in terms of concession. Literally, right now, no concessions. While he's asking everyone in the state of Connecticut, every single mother, every middle-class family, everyone that punches a clock, he's asking more of you, though. He's asking for you to sacrifice $800 a year in tolls. He's asking you to pay higher prices for every service you can imagine. That's what he's asking of you. But no, not the unions, not the ones that put him in office, because at the end of the day, what the Democrats don't tell you is the special interests that roam the halls of the Capitol are big and they're strong, and people like Ned Lamont are afraid of them. They are afraid of them. And the reality is for those of us that are out there that are not in this ecosystem of power, we have to remain strong and organized if we're going to take this on, because it's only going to get worse. If Ned Lamont lacked the courage even to publicly say, I'd like the unions to give us this concession. No, he didn't even do that. What he said was no concessions. Nothing. I want you to remember that when you get your first toll bill. I want you to remember that when your taxes go up and the price of milk goes up and the price of diapers go up. Because it is Ned Lamont and the special interests in Hartford that are the direct cause of the suffering that is going to come to your family. So when we're arguing with liberals and Democrats within our families and in our inner circle, remember, I say this constantly, don't get angry. Just simply talk about the impact in your family. Talk about your relative who struggles with a minimum wage job or a job that maybe they're making better than minimum wage. Or talk about the fact that the state of Connecticut lost 2,000 jobs since January. Talk about how these policies aren't growth-based. Why is it that the Democrats are so unwilling to look in the mirror and say, yeah, we screwed this up, but we're going to try to fix it? They don't even do it. They pretend like they didn't screw it up, that it's somebody else's fault, like there's a boogeyman out there. No, it's them. Why don't we have any money for roads and bridges? Because they stole it for operating expenses. I mean, here's the other thing. I mean, Ned Lamont actually had a press conference and he sent some tweets out about how he wants to hear how the government can be more efficient. Let's cut the red tape. And literally this week, they announced a job position. The Deputy Commissioner of Economic and Community Development. That looks a good title. That sounds good. The salary is ranging from $109,000 to $225,000. Actually, I should say $937,000 a year. It's open to the public. Anyone can apply. But this is the best part. Now remember, literally had a press conference about cutting the red tape. This position, the first bullet point, and I'll read it: supporting, promoting, and advocating for existing Connecticut businesses, keeping the dialogue going with companies long after relocation or growth. No one's moving here. Our companies aren't growing. And a salary of $225,000 a year on the high end, I get that. I don't know that it's adding or cutting red tape. I'm gonna err on the side that it's adding red tape. But this is exactly the hypocrisy and lies that are coming out of the Democratic Party to give the impression that they're trying to do these things. Right? It's the same thing when Governor Lamont said, I'll take any idea to try to fix this. Well, they certainly didn't meet with the Yankee Institute. They didn't take that meeting on where and how they can possibly cut spending and be more efficient. No, they didn't take that meeting. No. But any ideas you have, send them along. Yeah, they're not going to take them. It's a ploy, and don't buy it. Because if he's willing to lie, if Ned Lamont is willing to lie about eliminating a position or getting rid of a guy that would help the political rival, he'll lie to you about anything. Because that's literally the one thing that we would all kind of get. Right? We get it. Okay, you don't like him. He supported Bob. This guy helped pay for those mean commercials, Ned. And, God forbid at the Greenwich cocktail party, they're all, judging you for a bad commercial. But if he's unwilling to be truthful with the residents of this state on that, or the one thing that we would all kind of be like, yeah, I get it. He'll lie to us about anything. He will lie to us about anything. And that's what we have to keep in mind when they're talking about, our toll plan is only going to cost X. It's not. It's probably going to be twice as much. So if they estimate it's going to cost a single mom living in New Britain, Connecticut, driving to work, it's going to cost her $850 for the year. It's probably going to cost her $1,200. I'm just going on my gut and based on history of the Democratic Party in the state. But that's what we're probably looking at. And the funny part about this idea that we should be cutting things, I want to play a clip for you. And again, I played a couple clips from Representative Perillo. He's a Republican from Shelton. He's a great guy. But I want you to listen to this exchange because what Representative Perillo is highlighting, and by the way, he got this from a Democrat elected official in Massachusetts, where they discovered that EBT cards or the food stamp cards that can take cash, you can get cash from at an ATM. Some of the transactions were occurring in Orlando at Disney, which would mean you're on, and it's people that reside in Connecticut. So Connecticut is paying the food stamp cash. I want you to listen to this.
What is your data on the amount of fraud that you know is going on that this bill hopes to address?
Well, what we know is where funds are spent. And DSS, to their credit, was able to give us data from 2016 showing that money is spent in other states and showing us which states in which that money is spent. No surprise, Massachusetts and New York are the states in which most money is spent outside of Connecticut. Interestingly, though, the third most common state where money is spent outside of Connecticut is Florida, which is kind of a surprise. Now, we don't have any more specific data than that here in Connecticut, but Massachusetts does. In Massachusetts, which actually has already passed legislation to this effect, limiting out-of-state, inappropriate out-of-state spending. In Massachusetts, Florida, as I said, was very high, but they were actually able to drill down a little bit more deeply than just which state. In Massachusetts, they drilled down to the zip code. And ironically, they determined that the majority of Florida money spent by Massachusetts recipients, majority of that money spent in Florida was spent in Orlando. There's only one thing in Orlando. Now, can we correlate that directly to the state of Connecticut? Certainly we cannot. But rest assured, we will get the data to determine whether or not spending by Connecticut recipients in Florida is spent on vacation. What is not acceptable to me is that individuals who do not live here are receiving benefits from taxpayers in the state of Connecticut that could otherwise go towards purposes here in the state of Connecticut. It could be money for schools. It could be money spent elsewhere within the social service system for individuals who live here and need help. That is the focus of this.
I have a lot of problems with this bill and the premise behind it. And I'll just state that for the record. Thank you.
Representative Ann Hughes represents a wealthier part of the state. Doesn't think we should question these types of transactions. When my friends are working 40 hours, 50 hours, 60 hours a week, trying to put some money away in a retirement account, trying to buy a new car, and they listen to how people with EBT cards are going on vacation when most of them haven't been on a vacation in years. And this representative, this Democrat, doesn't think that we have a right to say, hey, it's not a fair use of the money. You're supposed to be someone in need. How are you affording to get to Disneyworld or a strip club? I don't understand. And to ask people to be accountable with the money that we give as taxpayers to them. And I get when there's need. I mean, I'm not judging people who are in need. But when we talk about how they're utilizing the money that we provide them, I think that we're allowed to question it. And I think that the thing, anyone that's paid taxes, we have to account for every dime and dollar. And I always laugh because obviously this was tax season. I have to laugh because, you get a W-2 and it tells you how much you made and how much you paid in taxes. You're a small business, the IRS already knows how much you made. It's almost like it's this system where we have to accurately, like they're checking to see if we're going to tell the truth about how much we made. Now, sure, you can list all your deductions and things like that, but I always found it interesting that you had to restate how much money you made. They already know. But meanwhile, while we're accounting for every dime and dollar that we spend and earn, the people that we are helping, and in certain cases that help is certainly needed, but there's no accountability if someone's abusing the system. And the fact that a Republican stands up and says, hey, maybe it's not a good idea that EBT cards are being utilized in places that we know they shouldn't be, like strip clubs or, I don't know, in California or at Disneyland or Disneyworld or Six Flags. Yeah, this is unfair to the people that are paying the tab. It's literally like going out to dinner, not ordering any food, and everyone there ordering the most expensive item on the menu. And then they hand you the bill. That's what this is. And the Democrats can't even have a discussion about it. That's how bad it's gotten in this state. And the irony is Representative Perillo got this from a Democrat in Massachusetts. It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. I just want to remind everyone, we have to stay vigilant. You cannot give up. I cannot stress that enough. All is not lost. If we were to actually take a step and look, and truly look, you have a lot of Democrats, particularly this one, Ann Hughes. She only won by a couple hundred votes. She didn't win by, 15, 20%. We're talking tiny margins. With a little muscle, a little money, in 2020, we can change all this. And that's the truth. We just have to stay vigilant, we have to stay hungry, and we have to stay dedicated. Joining me now, former Senator Len Suzio. Len, I was thinking about, you and I have actually had a couple of fun things through the years that we've done. And I know this whole thing is just the latest chapter of disastrous policies from the Democrats, but I don't know if you remember, we did when the Democrats were raising gas taxes, we did that event in Meriden.
You
remember that?
The great, that was a fun thing, and it was a wild scene.
But one of the things
scene.
Well, and before we get to the tolls and what Ned Lamont did this week in regards to what they've put out, and I really wanted to kind of take the opportunity and let you kind of really explain how this is deceiving and all that other nonsense. But one of the things I also wanted to bring up is, and I have no idea where this is completely coming, so I don't know where you stand on this. The prioritizing progress thing, where the Republicans are looking to bond some money in order to actually pay for the roads and bridges, which historically is what you're supposed to bond money for. But I also remember, correct me if I'm wrong, were you the senator that kind of spearheaded the stopping the Communist Party of New Haven from getting bonded money to improve? Do you remember that?
Yes, I was. Hey, boy, you have a good memory. Yeah, we got a bunch of veterans down there in front of the Communist Party headquarters and had a big scene saying, "Hey, they're not putting money into the VA facilities, but they're willing to give hundreds of thousands of dollars to refurbish the Communist Party headquarters in New Haven. What's wrong with this picture?"
Well, and actually, yeah, can you just explain to the listeners that don't remember this? I just wanted to walk through this because the Democrats now are claiming bonding is a terrible idea. But I want to remind people, just what was it, 4 years ago? 5 years ago?
It was 2012, I believe.
So 2012, please explain to the listeners what the Democrats were trying to bond money for.
Well, believe it or not, Joel Fishman and the Communist Party headquarters are in a building down in New Haven. And I got a phone call one day from someone who wanted to remain anonymous, but alerting me to the fact that on the governor's bond agenda for the following Monday was an item. It wasn't a lot of money, but it was like $300,000 or something like that. And it was money to help them refurbish the Communist Party headquarters in New Haven. And at first I thought, you got to be kidding me. This isn't real. This is a joke. Somebody's trying to trick me. But I found out it was definitely true. And so we alerted a number of veterans, and we had a big rally on Friday. That for the Friday before the bond commission was scheduled to meet. Got, of course, lots of media coverage. The vets were there complaining, "Hey, look at our VA facilities are going lacking, and the state's neglecting them, saying they don't have enough money." But here they are finding money to refurbish the Communist Party headquarters. Where's the priorities? Well, it was a long shot. We didn't know if we could stop Governor Malloy from, at the last minute like that. But lo and behold, on Monday morning, I got a phone call from Adam Liajo saying, "Guess what's not on the bond commission agenda?" And they took it off because they knew they had hit the hot button. And I think it was a New Haven Independent blasted me as an anti-commie legislator or something like that.
Well, what also was so fascinating was at the time, I think it was Senator Harp had pushed for this. She said that rejecting this money, and this is kind of give you a glimpse of where the Democrats were in 2012 and how radical they were then. They just didn't show their stripes as often. And I'm almost positive she said that stopping the Communist Party from getting this bonded money to improve, like it had something. It was an affront to freedom of speech.
Yes, you're right.
Which see, I have a good memory.
I'm impressed, JR. You're definitely right on. And that's like esoteric stuff. But you're right. I mean, the defense of the spending was ridiculous. I can't believe they said what they said. Today, I wouldn't be so surprised because they're coming out of the closet, so to speak, and proudly proclaiming themselves to be socialists, if not communists at this point in time.
Well, and I think that's actually why Democrats don't like to actually engage or debate me anymore, because I have a long memory like that and I can recall. And so when I point out, and we put on Twitter that the Democrats just recently, a few years ago, were bonding money for the Communist Party. And now all of a sudden bonding money for roads and bridges is a bad idea. It's crazy. Well, I was just going to say, so let's go on to the tolls. One of the things that the Democrats' argument is that we're broke, right? That there's no money in the Special Transportation Fund. So first and foremost, why don't we address that topic? You are the expert on this topic. Is the state of Connecticut broke when it comes to the Special Transportation Fund?
Well, it's headed towards in that direction, based on the fact that so much in gas tax dollars have been intercepted and before it got into the Special Transportation Fund. And
well, I was just saying, you use Senator Kathy Austin's term, which is diverted.
Yes,
right. We diverted the money.
Well, actually, let me say one thing about that. She was actually incorrect. She said that the STF, the Special Transportation Fund, was never raided, but the funds have been diverted. But she was wrong about that. The STF was raided 7 times between the year 2000 and 2015 for about $160 million. I have the OFA documents to prove that. So she was wrong about that, number one. And then this idea of belittling the idea that, oh, well, we didn't raid the fund. We just intercepted funds before they got there, as if that's less damaging, is crazy. And by the way, from 2000 to 2016, I think it was, every single year they intercepted funds that were supposed to go into the SDF, the Petroleum Gross Receipts Tax, adding up to $1,860 million. That's in addition to the $160 million that they actually took out of the fund during the same period of time. So it's over $2 billion that they really took out of the transportation fund.
How over how long of a period of time do you think that is? The $2 billion
from the year 2000.
So since 2000, because the Democrats have controlled the legislature and the purse strings. So since 2000, and the reason I just want to highlight this before we actually get on the topic of what it's going to cost hardworking families from where, Meriden, where you're from, I want everyone to understand, because I've dealt with this, and I'm sure you have as well. You encounter people that say, well, we have to pay for roads and bridges. So when you are armed, and I want all the listeners to understand, when you're armed with the factual information that, well, hold on, did you know that the state of Connecticut literally diverted $2 billion away since 2000 that would have went towards infrastructure upgrades? And I'm curious, Senator, where did the money go? What did they divert or raid, or what did they use? Because I've made this argument. If the Democrats came to us and said, listen, we need to raid this transportation fund because we're going to shore up our pension. We're going to shore up some long-term liability. Maybe I'd go along with it, right? To say, okay, we're going to try to reduce our long-term liability. We're going to try to get our spending under control in regards to one of the biggest problems we have. But correct me if I'm wrong, that's not where the money went.
No.
This $2 billion.
Most of it, almost all of it, went into a black hole called the general fund, to make up for deficits that were being incurred. And that was the way they balanced the budget. They balanced the budget by taking money out of or intercepting money intended to go to the Special Transportation Fund.
So essentially operating expenses.
Yes. And can I
for the most part,
can I interject something about the borrowing thing that because you were addressing that issue a few minutes ago. People don't know this, but the Democrat plan to finance the infrastructure spending, tolls were only a small part of that. There was a special transportation finance panel that was convened by Governor Malloy that was charged with the responsibility to recommend to the governor how to finance the $100 billion spending that Governor Malloy had proposed for transportation infrastructure. And they came back and said, okay, you start with tolls, but then they added on a huge tax increase in the gas taxes from 25 cents to 39 cents a gallon. They advocated increasing the Petroleum Gross Receipts Tax. They advocated big increases, whopping increases in motor vehicle registration fees and permits, etc. And this is what I'm leading up to. They recommended stupendous, record-breaking borrowing on top of that. So much so that in the year 2029, they had a schedule and they recommended borrowing over $5 billion in that 1 year. This is in addition to the tolls and the gas tax increases and everything else. So when they criticize Republicans saying, oh, you're going to mortgage the future and put it on the backs of our children, the borrowing in the prioritized progress program is less than the borrowing in the Democratic program, which includes the tolls too. Nobody knows that.
Wow. Well, look, I think one of the things that what we've realized, particularly in the last few years, because of how our economy in the state has gone, is that the Democrats are woefully dishonest when it comes to what's happening with the money coming in, where the money's going, how much they're borrowing. And then, you highlight a great example. It's like when Republicans suggest borrowing for legitimate reasons, like a bridge to make sure it doesn't collapse, we can't do that. We're on a debt diet. But they don't mention the fact, to your point, of all this other scheduled borrowing that they have for the things that they want to do. It's just, it's the most frustrating thing. And I think the other thing, and for those that don't know, I'm speaking with Senator Len Suzio from the district includes Meriden. I know it's a couple other towns, but I think for you, one of the biggest passions when it comes to some of these things like the gas tax or tolls, because what you recognize is your constituents, the people that you represented, were the ones that would feel the pinch worse than, say, people from wealthier communities. And I always love that about you, Len, is that you always kind of took on these, when the government or state would do these smaller, well, we're going to take 25 cents here, we're going to do, because that all adds up. And that's actually the next thing I wanted to talk about, because obviously the Democrats this week kind of put out there, well, this is what it's going to cost you. And I wanted you to kind of touch on that, because you and I kind of briefly touched on this offline. Kind of explain how they're looking at this, because frankly, I looked at it and I could be wrong. Their projection is $2 billion they think they're going to get from tolling. But based on the numbers they presented, I don't think they get there. Yeah. So that's what I'm really confused.
Well, if I could step back for a second, just to summarize the situation, the so-called need for tolls is predicated on projected deficits in the Special Transportation Fund. And the question is, how accurate are those projected deficits? Are they real? What are they based on? And there's three things I want to make certain your audience is aware of. One is that those projected deficits were partly, one reason is that they were projecting decreases in gas tax collections, which is not happening. The governor got in front of a group of business guys a few weeks ago, and he basically announced that the gas taxes were, quote, disappearing. Can you spell Tesla? And so he was just like one of those things. Oh, hold on a second. There we go. So anyways, he made this statement, which demonstrably, provably untrue, that gas tax collections were disappearing. In 2005, we collected $650 million worth of gas taxes. In 2018, we collected $822 million of gas taxes. So the gas taxes are not disappearing. That's lie number one. The second thing driving the deficit forecast was this prodigious spending, unlike anything we've ever had before in the state of Connecticut. Malloy proposed $100 billion over 30 years. We had never spent more than $1 billion a year. He's proposing tripling that for 30 years, basically. And there was a document presented to the legislature, detailing the $100 billion. The legislature never cracked the book open. They just took it as a given. No one questioned it. It was just given as an accepted. And I'm convinced they didn't care about looking at it, because all they were looking at was an excuse to say there was a deficit and that they had no choice but to do tolls and other things. So that's the second thing, this unquestioned, unvetted spending. And I'm going to come back to that in a second. And then the third thing that was backing up these projected deficits was an assumption that there would be no more federal money available to pay for the incremental spending. Prior to Malloy coming in, we had been spending about $1 billion a year, and $700 to $800 million was being covered by the federal government. So we were getting about 70 to 80% of our infrastructure spending subsidized by the feds. But in the projections for the deficits, they assume nothing for the incremental spending. So if you go spend an extra $1 billion a year, the entire $1 billion has got to be paid for by Connecticut.
Wow.
Those are the three assumptions that are backing up this projected deficit. They're all wrong, but no one's questioned it. Now, this week, two events happened which expose that nonsense. The first thing was on Monday, the Department of Transportation met with the bond subcommittee to talk about what their bonding needs and this and that. And they were questioned about how much they have to spend on infrastructure spending to not only keep things in good shape, but to kind of get them back into a like kind of first class condition. And they testified that the amount was $2 billion per year. So keep that in mind, because don't forget, the deficit was being basically precipitated by $100 billion over 30 years. That's $3.3 billion a year, not $2 billion. So number one, they're saying we could live with a lot less than what we said we needed. The second thing that happened was that the governor had two press conferences on Wednesday in which he touted the tolls plan, and he mentioned that he had gone down to Washington, D.C. and met with the Secretary of Transportation, Elaine Chao, and to discuss with her federal funding. And he was proud and enthusiastic to come back with much encouragement that there's going to be a new federal program that whereby the feds will pick up 80% of the funding, 80-20. And he reiterated it, saying that not only Secretary Chao, but Congressman Larson had encouraged him, get in line, get the new money. It's going to be coming, the legislation is being processed, etc. So stop and think about it. Remember, one of the factors driving the deficit was an assumption that we get not a nickel of additional federal funding to pay for all our extra spending. So if they're going to spend $1 billion more per year now, and if the federal program does become available, $800 million would be paid for by the federal grants. And that, ironically, that comes out exactly to what they're saying the tolls would raise. So basically, if the governor's accurate, and if the Congressman Larson is accurate, and we know the Trump administration is pushing for a big infrastructure spending plan for transportation, then if that happens, 80% of all the additional spending will be paid for by the feds without tolls. So all of a sudden, Connecticut's need for financing is not going to be 100 cents of every new dollar spent. It's going to be 20 cents, a dramatic decline, which obviates the need for tolls.
Well, and that's where, and once again, I'm going to highlight the fact that I'm sorry, I completely believe the Democrats are being disingenuous. This is a revenue grab so that they can use tolls as an opportunity for operating expenses to pay for some of the other things that they're doing. And I think the irony is they also want to create an entirely separate agency to run this that has no legislative oversight. Correct me. Am I right when I say it? Right? So essentially, what the legislature, Ned Lamont, is saying, "Oh, we're going to put the tolls here, and this is what we're going to charge you." But we no longer have the authority to keep that toll price where it is. So essentially, within 6 months, the tolling agency, whatever you want to call them,
the Transportation Authority.
In my mind, I'm thinking of, and I can't come to my head, in Robin Hood, the sheriff of Knoxley. That's who I picture, right? But they can say, you know what, it's not enough. We got to go up 10 more cents. We got to go up $1 or whatever it is. And I think as of right now, and this is why I really value you as a Republican, as an elected official, your town, Meriden, Connecticut. If you are a single mom working in Meriden, and you work in Hartford as a dental hygienist or a nurse, your average salary in those fields is anywhere between $60,000 to $75,000 a year, depending overtime and all those other things. Could you really afford, as a single mom, $800 a year in tolling? That's what, and that's on the low end.
Yeah, and that's after tax too. By the way, you don't get any tax deduction for that, so you're really you get the short end of the stick, and that's basically per car. So if you're a 2-car family, it's like, okay, you can make it over $1,600 a year. And Meriden is a city, so we have a disproportionately high part of the population that's working class, lower working class, blue collar, and of course, the tolls are a form of regressive tax. It hits the lower income classes disproportionately, and the middle income people in Connecticut are struggling to begin with as well. So I don't have the Greenwich multimillionaires living in Meriden as my constituents when I was
and that was the other. That's my other favorite part about that. And look, I'll be very honest, and I may get criticized for this for those that listen, but the Democrats that won, or that flipped seats for the most part, were wealthier communities. And so when I listen to a Democrat from Greenwich or from one of these wealthier communities talk about how, oh, don't worry, you can pay, so to avoid traffic and congestion, you can pay a higher fee. Yeah, maybe you can't. So it's basically like, oh, hey, working class, working poor, you're going to be stuck in traffic while I zip by in my Tesla.
Yeah,
because I can afford no traffic.
By the way, some of those Democrats who won, particularly in the Senate, are multimillionaires. They spent their own money, hundreds of thousands of dollars. They didn't take the public funding. They circumvented that, and they put hundreds of thousands of dollars into their own campaigns to win their own seat. So
Norm Needleman,
yeah,
$500,000 of his own money, and then voted to give 11% pay raises to state employees making over $100,000 a year. Yeah, because it's his money, right?
Yeah. And Alex Bergeron put in she put in over $250,000 of her own money down there in Greenwich too. So a lot of these people are not truly representing the middle class or the working class. They're upper income, upper echelon people who are very wealthy and decided they wanted to buy their way into power, and they outspent their Republican opponents 2, 3, and 4 times what the Republicans could spend that were relying on the public financing and staying within the SEC guidelines.
Well, I'm glad that you're still out there, Len, and I hope that you continue to be an advocate for the working class of the state and for your community, because we need voices like you. We need opposition to highlight, the nonsense and the lies and the manipulation and the dishonesty that's coming out of Hartford. And, I hate to say that because I genuinely believe like there's some good people up there, but what they're not being honest about is that their policies have led to failure. So instead of saying, we own this, we really kind of screwed this up, they just double down and they keep taking and taking and taking.
Yes, and I'm worried because elections do have consequences, and the legislature in this last election basically lurched way to the left. I mean, radical left, not just left of center, but they're out there on the other side of the left field wall. And so they're proposing legislation that is going to exacerbate the state's situation. We know that Connecticut is one of the few states not to recover since the Great Recession. We're still have a gross domestic product that's less than it was in 2007. And you have to say, well, why? Why, when all the surrounding states have more than recovered and Connecticut hasn't? You have to look and say it's got to have something to do with our political policies and the record-breaking tax increases that were passed in the Malloy administration, which, by the way, the new administration, I'm appalled by the budget proposal that Governor Lamont has put forward. It's balancing the budget with 100% by tax increases, not a nickel of spending cuts anywhere. And in effect, people haven't said much about it, but what Governor Lamont's proposing is record-breaking tax increases in itself. Not just small incremental tax increases. I'm talking about billions and billions of dollars of tax increases. And you haven't seen too much of that because the tolls have kind of grabbed all the oxygen in the room, and understandably so. But the budget is just as bad a disaster as the tolls are.
Yeah, well, there's no question. And I think that what's happening is people are not recognizing that the wealthy are leaving. I mean, we lost 2,000 jobs beginning of 2019. That trend isn't going to stop because the policies are not changing. It's doubling down on what has failed in the state. And I'm hoping in 2020, we get an opportunity to right this ship, because I don't, and I argue this with people. Economies are cyclical, and so if we're on an upswing nationally and Connecticut misses the rising tide, and if we flatten out or go back to kind of a little dip, we're in real trouble. I mean, real trouble, because we've got none of the benefit of the rise. And that was the other thing that made me laugh too. I think when Malloy, same thing, but when Malloy was leaving, they talked about like, oh, we had unexpected revenue. Yeah, because we're a state that is heavily reliant on the financial industry, which is stock trading essentially. And the stock market's booming. So basically, because of what was happening within the Washington, D.C. and some of the policies that were being put out by the White House has benefited the stock market, which has benefited tax collection here in Connecticut. But you didn't hear that from Dan Malloy, or the fact that the military, upped its contracts with EB. Those meant jobs. Nothing to do with the quality of Connecticut's economy, everything to do with the federal government. So if we take a downturn, this state, it's not. I mean, we have yet to recover from the real estate crisis of 2009. No one talked. Almost a decade later.
That's right. And again, it's not like we're joined by our neighboring states. Every single one of them is blowing right past us. And so geographically, we're in the same region, same kind of demographics and that kind of thing. It's just mind-boggling how the Democratic leadership hasn't awakened to its disastrous tax, spend, and borrow policies and what the devastation they're wreaking on the state. It's really, I don't know. I fear for the state right now, because if this budget passes as proposed and the tolls pass on top of that, it'll definitely be record-breaking by far. Malloy's big tax increases will pale in comparison to what Lamont's going to be visiting upon the state.
And it's not even just the tax increases, but also policy changes that could directly impact consumer costs and goods, that, higher minimum wage, all this other stuff. That isn't a quote unquote direct tax increase. I mean, it is, but that's not even factored in what you're talking about. Right. Yeah. So, well, here's what I want, Len. What is the one thing, as we close out, what is the one thing you want the listeners to remember and know in regards to this toll issue?
The toll crisis is a contrived crisis predicated on phony facts and questionable assumptions. When you look at the real numbers and you look at the potential advent of the federal funding, it will completely eliminate the need for tolls. We, at the very least, ought to be vetting the spending, and number two, waiting for the federal government to implement its new transportation infrastructure financing. And I think when you look at that, it'll become crystal clear to everyone that the toll debate is a moot debate. We don't need tolls to finance the infrastructure spending we've got to do. It will be paid for with the new federal program by and large, and the rest of it is well within our resources.
Well, Senator, thank you so much for joining me, Senator Len Suzio. Meriden, I really appreciate taking the time and talking to us.
It's a pleasure, JR. Anytime I can help educate the public, I'd be happy to come on again.
All right, perfect. Thank you.
Take care, JR.